People are attracted to cartoons because they love to laugh. And it's the cartoonist who is able to combine humor with ideas.
When most Americans hear the word comics, some very specific images come to mind, primarily superhero movies and manga. If they're old enough, then the newspaper's Sunday pages come into the conversation. True comics aficionados can tell you the origins of their favorite heroes, or even the origins of their favorite corporations like Marvel or DC. But the foundational history of American comics has largely been overlooked and forgotten within mainstream media. Creators and characters who were superstars 100 years ago have all but faded into obscurity, relegated to piles of crumbling yellow paper and reels of rotting microfilm, preserved only by the efforts of newspaper hoarding historians like Bill Blackbeard. Let's take a look at some of the earliest innovators who long ago established a new medium which set the stage for the stories today's general public obsessively ingests through film adaptation after film adaptation after reboot after update. If you've done even a little research into the history of comics in America, you will no doubt have heard of R.F. Outcault's Yellow Kid, also known as Mickey Dugan, a little Irish boy in a big yellow shirt causing trouble in the slums of Hogan's Alley. For years, comics historians considered Hogan's Alley to be the first comic strip. There was a whole mythology around the chief of the New York World's color department choosing the yellow of Mickey's shirt in order to test a faster drying pigment. This story was told over and over as accepted fact, even being printed in official comics histories. The truth is, the Yellow Kid was yellow because Outcault probably just thought it looked good, and while Outcault's Kid may have been the first popular comic strip in America, and certainly the namesake for yellow journalism, the medium of comics started long before Hogan's Alley graced the pages of Joseph Pulitzer's New York World in the 1890s. We can find images which resemble comics all the way back to cave paintings from 30,000 years ago, pictures in sequence, possibly telling a story. We see the basic conventions of comics employed throughout history, in Egyptian hieroglyphics, or Aztec art, or in standard colonialist art history class pieces, like the Trajan Column or the Bayeux Tapestry. Scott McCloud covers a number of these possible predecessors to comics in his indispensable book, Understanding Comics, available at your local library. While these ancient examples may share certain qualities with what we now know as comics, it's important to state they are not comics. They are proto-comics, lending much to the coming medium, but not existing within it. Like the New York Dolls to punk rock, these catalysts were predecessors, not participants. While many factors contributed to the creation of the comics medium, modern comics really began to appear in the early 1800s, most notably in the 1830s with the work of German cartoonist Rudolph Topher. Topfer's work has influenced generations of artists. Another German cartoonist, and near contemporary of Rudolph Topfer, was Wilhelm Busch. Busch set the stage for all cartooning to come with his creative panel choices and his groundbreaking approach to action, illustrating movement in print way before animators were using the same tricks. His most popular creation was Max und Moritz, a story of two boys who get into a lot of trouble together and get punished for it, a theme which would prove successful again and again with early comics readers. The aforementioned comics historian Bill Blackbeard said that 3 comic figures of popular fiction dominated virtually to the exclusion of all others: the demon child, the clownish innocent, and the humanized animal. Max and Moritz certainly fit the demon child mold. And when those comics found their way to the States, they set the stage for many comics to come. And it was in American newspapers where the medium would really take off. The earliest American comics are full of forgotten characters and creators. One standout was Walt Mcdougall, who is credited with having the first color Sunday strip in 1893, a big deal back when newspapers were a daily necessity. Mcdougall, and many other cartoonists pioneering the new medium, crafted beautiful illustrations for a lot of lackluster gags. It wasn't until Outcault that comics really grabbed the attention of the public. R.F. Outcault's first successful strip, and the first wildly popular comic of all time, Hogan's Alley, was usually a full or half-page illustration, filled with many hidden gags and typically accompanied by a typeset block of text. The cartoon focused on tenement life, immigrants, and children living in poverty at the turn of the century. Outcalt allowed New Yorkers a view of the suffering around them through a comedic lens. To modern sensibilities, many of these images and jokes will no doubt seem shocking and insensitive, but readers at the time were mesmerized. Mickey Dugan, known as the Yellow Kid because of the oversized yellow shirt his dialogue appeared on, was a superstar with the merchandising to prove it. Outcalt's other great comic success was Buster Brown, a strip about a boy and his dog getting into trouble and learning lessons. While the Yellow Kid fits the mold of clownish innocent, Buster Brown was a bit more devilish. Each Buster Brown strip ended with a resolution, wherein Buster would preach some comedic moral sermon on the preceding events. Buster was a huge hit, with stage and film adaptations and plenty of product placement. In fact, due to the licensing of shoes, the names of Buster Brown and his friend Mary Jane, modeled after Outcalt's own daughter, remain a part of popular culture over a century later. Another early cartoonist, initially published before R.F. Outcalt with his Little Bears and Little Tigers, humanized animals, James Swinnerton would eventually hit pay dirt with his celebrated strip, Little Jimmy. Incredibly similar in form to Buster Brown, Little Jimmy spent each strip getting into some kind of terrible trouble before being punished in the end. Unlike Buster Brown, Jimmy doesn't mean to cause trouble. He's a poor, clownish innocent with a lot of bad luck. In 1906, Swinnerton was diagnosed with tuberculosis and given only 2 weeks to live. His friend and publisher William Randolph Hearst sent him to the American Southwest to seek treatment in the dry air. And James Swinnerton fell in love with the landscape, creating a number of cartoon works staged in the locale and eventually becoming a well-regarded landscape painter. He recovered from TB and lived to the ripe old age of 98. Almost completely forgotten today, Little Jimmy was adapted for animation in early silent films and later as a co-star for animated icon Betty Boop. In 1897, as the initial comics craze was taking off, Rudolph Dirks found fame and fortune with The Katzenjammer Kids, a blatant imitation of Wilhelm Busch's Max und Moritz. Although The Katzenjammer Kids was yet another strip about children causing trouble and being punished for it, New York audiences at the turn of the century couldn't seem to get enough. The incredibly popular Katzenjammer Kids would continue to appear in newspapers for 106 years, under the direction of 7 different cartoonists, finally ending in 2006 as the longest-running comic strip of all time. Rudolph Dirks had a younger, lesser-known brother, Gus Dirks. Known for quirky and charming bug comics, he died in 1902 at the age of 23. In 1904, Major Ozone's Fresh Air Crusade introduced a number of readers to a creator who is now regarded as one of the greatest cartoonists of all time. Of course, Major Ozone wasn't the work which would really showcase the genius of George Harriman. That would come nearly a decade later, in 1913, with Crazy Cat, the story of a gender-fluid, idealistic, warm-hearted cat living in a surreal version of Coconino County, Arizona. At the heart of much of the story is a bizarre love triangle. Crazy is in love with a married mouse named Ignatz, who wants nothing to do with them, and hurls bricks at Crazy every chance he gets. Confused and kind, Crazy takes the violent act as an expression of love, deepening their affection for Ignatz. Officer Pup is a police officer in love with Crazy for their pure heart, who despises Ignatz for his abusive behavior and regularly arrests the mouse as a result. A black man from Louisiana passing in the racist white society of turn-of-the-century New York, Harriman experimented with characters and settings and language in ways no one had seen before in comics. and in ways no one has yet been able to repeat. His influence on modern comics has been immeasurable. As is usually the case with groundbreaking work, the general public at the time had very little interest in the intellectual avant-garde nature of Crazy Cat. But critics widely praised the strip for showing that comics could in fact be art, and William Randolph Hearst, the publisher, insisted on keeping Crazy in print. George Harriman wrote and drew Crazy Cat for 30 years, and, in spite of some unworthy pop culture adaptations in that time, the strip and its author have remained highly regarded and widely celebrated, leading to collection after collection of reprints in fancy volumes today. Like Harriman, another George had milestones in 1904 and 1913. George McManus debuted the world's first family strip with The Newlyweds, to great success, and followed it up with the even more successful Bringing Up Father 9 years later. McManus was a celebrity, known to pal around with movie stars like Buster Keaton, and a bet between him and cartoonist Windsor Mckay supposedly led to one of the first famous animated film shorts. Windsor Mckay was an animation pioneer, hand-drawn frame after frame in seemingly endless stacks, but before that, he was known as the creator of Little Nemo and Slumberland. Like Crazy Cat, Little Nemo wasn't a terribly popular strip with the reading public who liked slapstick and satisfying punishments for unruly children. But Windsor Mckay's innovative style, which pushed the known boundaries of formal techniques in illustration and cartooning, led to the strip staying in print from 1905 to 1927. The plot of Little Nemo is simple. A boy goes to bed, he has a dream, he wakes up. The plot is nearly non-existent. The lettering is rudimentary at best. But Little Nemo and Slumberland set new standards for what visual art could achieve in comics. Modern cartoonists and illustrators still study the work of Mckay. Even a subpar anime and a confusing Nintendo game couldn't sully his good name. Most people today have heard the word Kewpie and can immediately picture the bizarre but adorable features of the world-famous Kewpie doll. But the creator of the Kewpies has been all but forgotten, even though she came up with the world's most widely recognizable cartoon characters before the age of Mickey Mouse. Rose O'Neil skyrocketed to fame with her Kewpies. She was one of the very first published female cartoonists, and she was the most famous and highest paid female illustrator of her generation. While primarily known for the Kewpies, O'Neil was an accomplished illustrator, writer, and fine artist. Her work graced many magazine covers and advertisements with a skill rarely rivaled in the comics world. But in her spare time, when making art just for enjoyment, Rose O'Neil created what she called her Sweet Monsters, a series of works depicting beautiful and grotesque creatures of a mythology unique to Rose alone. She died in Springfield, Missouri in 1944 at the age of 69. Following the foundational years of American comics, America saw the First World War, then a Great Depression, and then a shift from comic strips to comic books. As the decades passed, many creators and characters who were once household names faded into obscurity. When the technology for microfilm was widely available, libraries and museums destroyed their vast collections of newspapers, opting for the space-saving nature of tiny, black and white, scratchy film. As a direct result, a century of irreplaceable color illustration and comics were lost forever. If not for people like Bill Blackbeard filling their homes with crumbling stacks of discarded paper in the 1960s and 70s, we'd have very little left at all. If you're interested in studying comic strips from the 19th and 20th century, the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum at Ohio State University has Blackbeard's collection, and a great deal more. If you can't make the trip anytime soon, then a great place to get started reading is barnaclepress.com, an online collection of microfilm scanned comic strips which, while they can't show the vibrant colors of Pulitzer or Hearst's printing presses, they do preserve the stories and the drawings people enjoyed generations ago.
One of the easiest and quickest ways of getting across an idea visually is through the use of the cartoon. Enjoy cartooning just for the fun of it.